Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at noon, President Park Geun-hye calls for parliamentary support for her drive to revitalize the economy and reform the public sector in her policy speech at the National Assembly. Divers have spotted a body in the Sewol-ho ferry that sank more than 6 months ago, raising the death toll to 295, but recovery is delayed by fast currents. Plus, Korean startups make up nearly half of some 130 Korean companies, ranking first in the global market, nearly double the number for large companies. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Wednesday, October 29th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
Good to have you with us. I'm Scott Thompson, filling in for Mark Broome. Our top story this afternoon, President Park Geun-hye addressed the National Assembly on this Wednesday morning, laying out the details of the government's budget next year, which is nearly $20 billion greater than this year's.
Now, the president appealed to lawmakers to pass the budget bill before the deadline of December 2nd and also called for bipartisan cooperation to promptly pass other bills related to revitalizing the economy and reforming the government.
For more, we have our presidential office correspondent, Eoh joining us on the line. So, Eoh, President Park said there's no other choice but to increase the budget despite mounting debt.
Hi, guys. Announcing the additional $20 billion today, President Park said her government will set economic revitalization as its utmost priority next year. Now, this despite the risks of financial losses and ballooning debt. She said because it may be the final golden time for the Korean economy to save itself from the threat of falling into a long-term slump. The president talked about current challenges both at home and abroad, such as low growth, low inflation, and the weak Japanese yen.
And Yusan, the president during a cabinet meeting Monday called for reforms to public employee pension system to be completed by the year's end, and it was anticipated she would talk about the contested reforms in her speech today. What did she say?
Jin-joo, referring to her three-year economic innovation plan aimed at revamping the economic structure to realize its growth potential, President Park highlighted the urgent need to reform the pension system that has long suffered from an expanding deficit, urging those in public service to accept the burden they may have to shoulder to prevent passing down debt to future generations. The president asked the parliament to cooperate in completing the reforms by the end of this year. Looking into the future, the president talked about her government's efforts to realize her vision of an innovation-led creative economy in converging IT and different sectors to spur growth, to stimulate the job market, and to bolster Korea's global competitiveness. In that respect, the government will increase its support for innovative entrepreneurs, startup, and small to mid-sized firms next year by 17% to total some $8 billion.
And Yusun, President Park also spent some time vowing to bolster the national safety system. Tell us a bit more about that.
The government has earmarked nearly $15 billion for safety next year, an 18% increase from this year. The president said the funds will be used to renovate the country's infrastructure and to improve national safety training and emergency communication networks. And for the first time, welfare budget will exceed 30% of the total budget next year to provide Korea seniors a basic pension and to support low-income households. On national reforms, President Park urged lawmakers to direct their attention to a stack of pending bills aimed at wiping out social corruption and revamping the government structure to strengthen the safety system. And following an address at the National Assembly, President Park met with the leaders of the ruling and opposition parties to once again call for a swift bill's passage. This was Eoh reporting on President Park's budget policy speech at the National Assembly.
And in other news, efforts to recover a body found inside the sunken Sewol-ho ferry yesterday are being hampered by poor conditions at sea, and divers resumed their operation to retrieve the body just about an hour ago. Now, the body, which is believed to be that of a female student, was discovered just a day after the victims' families decided not to lift the sunken vessel until all the missing victims are found. Kim Min-ji reports.
Recovery operations are underway off Korea's southwestern coast for a body that has been found on the sunken Sewol-ho ferry. The government's disaster response headquarters said divers tried early Wednesday to recover the body, but failed due to poor underwater visibility and fast currents. Divers say they will continue efforts throughout the day to reach the body whenever the currents subside. The decomposed body, presumed to be that of a female student, was spotted near a restroom on the fourth deck of the ferry. It's the first body seen inside the wreckage in 102 days and comes more than 6 months after the ferry capsized and sank. Victims' families raised doubts about the efficiency of ongoing search efforts, saying the latest discovery was made in the exact location they had specifically asked divers to search. Divers said they had searched the area more than a dozen times previously, but believe currents have recently carried the body to where it is now. The discovery pushes the death toll in the tragedy to 295, with 9 still missing. This past weekend, victims' families voted to continue the underwater search operation inside the ferry and to hold off on raising the 6,800-ton vessel. The representatives for the victims' families on Tuesday called for increased search efforts and to prioritize the wishes of the families as promised by the president. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
North Korea says it won't participate in the high-level talks that were slated for this week until the anti-Pyongyang leaflet campaigns by South Korean activists are banned. In a message sent via the Inter-Korean military hotline early Wednesday morning, North Korea said it is up to Seoul to decide whether to hold the second round of high-level talks or to cling to the leaflet launches. South Korea's Unification Ministry said that although it wants to resolve pending inter-Korean issues through dialogue, it cannot give in to the North's unjustifiable demands. The ministry added it does not plan to make additional proposals for talks for now. And the United States says it still has concerns about North Korea despite the recent release of American Jeffrey Fowle, who was held captive in the communist nation for nearly 6 months. U.S. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki said in a briefing on Tuesday that while Washington welcomed and celebrated Fowle's release, it shares the international community's existing concerns about the North's nuclear program. She also urged Pyongyang to suspend all activities related to its ballistic missile program as they are in clear violation of multiple UN sanctions. Responding to a question about how the North is funding its missile program, Psaki said the State Department could not offer any confirmation on the topic. The United Nations has gotten one step closer to referring North Korean officials to The Hague for human rights abuses. A draft proposal on the violations taking place within the North has been made public, and the UN General Assembly could vote on it as soon as next month. Park Geun-hye has the details.
The United Nations Third Committee, which deals with social, humanitarian, and cultural matters, has released a North Korean human rights draft proposal online. The 8-page draft urges the UN Security Council to take appropriate action to address the dire human rights situation in the North. It also says referrals to the International Criminal Court are in order, although it doesn't mention specific names. The draft expresses serious concerns about North Korea's systematic, extensive, and long-term crimes against humanity and denounces rampant human rights violations taking place inside political prison camps, which include forced abortions, torture, and starvation. The draft proposal was based on a 400-page report on North Korea's human rights situation published by an independent UN commission. The Third Committee is expected to pass the draft sometime next month, to be followed by a vote at the UN General Assembly. Adoption of the proposal by the General Assembly would not be legally binding, but South Korean officials say the vote would be a statement in and of itself. Marzuki Darusman, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in North Korea, said Tuesday that North Korea had invited him for a visit so he could investigate the human rights allegations firsthand. But that offer was made under one condition, that the UN remove the stipulation about referring North Korean officials to the ICC in a draft submitted to the third committee. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
North Korea has built a new test stand to develop ballistic missiles that can be launched from submarines. This, according to a new report published on U.S.-based website 38 North. It says commercial satellite imagery has identified the installation at the Sinpo South shipyard in the north. The report says the new stand is the right size and the right design to be used for the research, development, and testing of firing missiles out of a launch tube, as well as for evaluating their compatibility with submarines and surface combatants. The installation was first detected in September last year and is believed to have been completed before this past April. Seoul's foreign ministry has released its annual white paper, and much of it focuses on the stability or lack thereof within the North Korean regime. It points to uncertainties about Kim Jong-un's grip on power and the communist state's growing nuclear program as being of particular concern. Connie Kim reports.
North Korea has become even more unstable under the leadership of Kim Jong-un. In its annual white paper published on Tuesday, South Korea's foreign ministry blamed the young leader's reckless use of fear politics for increased instability within the regime, adding it all began with last year's execution of Kim's uncle, Jang Song-taek. The young leader's unrealistic policies and frequent reshuffling of senior officials were pointed out as supporting factors. The report says Pyongyang's external relations have also worsened, pointing to the regime's nuclear provocations. North Korea has test-fired more than 100 missiles and artillery shells on 19 different occasions so far this year. And while Pyongyang is believed to be steadily improving its nuclear capabilities, it has been demanding the resumption of the long-stalled six-party talks on its denuclearization without any preconditions. The white paper outlined that South Korea maintains its stance on pursuing a two-track policy of pushing for dialogue on the nuclear issue and pressuring the North to give up its nuclear arms at the same time. However, it also notes that Seoul has been lending a helping hand to Pyongyang on humanitarian grounds. $19 million worth of humanitarian aid has been provided by the South Korean government and civic groups. This year's white paper also included concerns over Japan's false territorial claims of Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island, as well as unresolved issues regarding the Japanese military's forced sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Can the speculation surrounding Kim Jong-un's six-week disappearance finally be put to rest? South Korea's spy agency claims the North Korean leader vanished from the public eye in early September after having a cyst removed from one of his ankles. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Where could North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have been during his 40-day absence? South Korea's National Intelligence Service says the young leader was on his surgery bed, getting a cyst removed from his right ankle. During a closed-door inspection on Tuesday, officials from the spy agency told lawmakers that a foreign medical team traveled to North Korea between September and October to treat Kim. They added he is recovering from the surgery, although his weight problem and frequent inspection tours could hamper a full recovery. Since July, Kim was seen walking with a limp, and until now, no clear explanation had been given as to why he mysteriously disappeared and then reappeared sporting a cane. During its briefing, the spy agency also revealed the rampant human rights violations of the communist state, citing 50 public executions this year alone. It said some 10 party officials in the north were executed for watching South Korean soap operas, while other senior officers were demoted by 2 ranks for poor accuracy rate of artillery. The agency also suspects North Korea may have expanded a labor camp in Gilju to relocate political prisoners out of its most notorious concentration camp in Yodok. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Korea recorded a current account surplus for the 31st consecutive month in September on the back of strong exports. The Bank of Korea says the surplus stood at $7.6 billion last month, up $420 million from a month earlier. Goods account surplus increased by 5% to nearly $7.7 billion, with exports growing by 4%, with steel products and machinery leading the gains. The services account, which includes expenditures from Koreans on overseas trips, logged a deficit of nearly $280 million, down from the $730 million recorded in August. And the unit price of Hyundai Motor Company's automobiles reached a record high in the third quarter, largely thanks to the company's Genesis model. The Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association says the unit price of Hyundai cars reached nearly $17,000 on average during the July to September period, a near 5% jump from the same period last year. The company sold nearly 9,800 units of its Genesis model in the third quarter, a 60% increase from a year earlier.
Supporting startups and fostering small and mid-sized companies as major exporters. That is at the heart of President Park Geun-hye's drive to turn Korea into what she calls a creative economy. But there are already signs that startups have a leg up on their much larger Korean counterparts in the global market. Our Song Ji-sun explains.
Scanning fingerprints is now a common way of keeping work hour records for employees. This Korean company, called Suprema, has won global recognition for developing and marketing the widest range of products in biometrics and access security industries. As the only company in the world capable of rolling out all products by using its own technologies and parts, it grabbed a 60% share in the fingerprint recognition module market in less than 15 years since its founding.
Many come up with business ideas, but the key to success for startups is commercializing those ideas. We've proved our technical prowess by repeatedly winning in the industry's most coveted competitions.
Suprema is one of some 63 Korean startups that enjoy #1 market share in the global stage, according to Korea's Small and Medium Business Administration. Although the Korean corporate sector is best known for the success of chaebols, or conglomerates, startups account for nearly half of Korea's 130 companies that have grabbed the largest market share in the world. Large companies represent only a quarter of them. The startup stocks range from manufacturers of juicers to vessel engine bearings. Aggressive investment in research and development is the key to startups could keep their lead in the global market. These leading startups are also actively diversifying their export markets, shipping their products on average of 31 countries overseas. Even if Korean startups manage to develop competitive technologies, many of them need support in other areas.
These startup businesses venture overseas markets solely with their technologies, but they lack efficient means to gain access to global clients. The government can help them win recognition by arranging exhibitions and other international events.
Industry experts also point out educational reform is needed to foster entrepreneurship and creativity badly needed to turn Korea into a trendsetter from a fast follower. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Over now to the 3-week International Telecommunication Union Conference currently underway in Busan, where a light has been shown on the gender gap in the ICT industry, and more importantly, how it can be narrowed. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The ICT sector has not just made the world a smarter place, it has been a primary driver of economic growth both internationally and here at home. The Bank of Korea says the ICT industry contributes nearly 30 to 40% of the nation's total GDP growth, and the government has vowed to invest some $4.6 billion into the IT sector to fuel growth. But many believe this is just a tip of the iceberg. Amabala Johnson, Nigeria's Minister of Communication Technology, who has piloted a dozen Nigerian schools in order to foster ICT-related education for girls, says the ICT sector can grow even more once the gender gap narrows.
In about 2015, 2016, 90% of available jobs will need some level of ICT skills. And if we're going to get more women employed, empowered, having income, having education, then we must skill them up on ICT. So it's a development issue. It's not just a nice to have thing. If women are going to get jobs, they must have ICT skills, and that's what we're trying to do.
However, many women are facing obstacles to acquiring ICT skills, largely due to the misconception that ICT isn't a field for women.
Women can do just as good a job as men can. There is no inequality in terms of ability. It's the perception. And I think if that perception persists, then less women will pursue the career. And that's what will hinder women entering this field.
Experts say it is imperative to provide young women with more role models, especially here in Korea, where the proportions of women in the ICT sector has been on a steady decline since 2009 to a low of 16% last year. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, Busan.
A higher than expected number of Korean medical workers have applied to be part of a Korean team that will join global efforts to combat Ebola in West Africa. The health ministry says over 40 medical professionals have applied to be part of a local group of 10 that will be dispatched to Ebola-hit countries. Authorities expect that the humanitarian work will not only contribute to the global fight against Ebola, but also provide Korea with an opportunity to acquire knowledge and expertise in dealing with the deadly virus. The government is taking applications until November 7th.
Let's now get a check on some of the global headlines we're following this hour with our Eunice Kim standing by at the News Center.
Eunice, the Australian government is facing quite a bit of backlash, it seems, after it implemented a blanket visa ban on citizens of West African countries worst hit by Ebola.
That's right. Sick or not, that ban applies if you are coming from Liberia, Sierra Leone, or Guinea. Australia's immigration minister told Parliament on Monday that the country had indeed stopped processing any visa applications from those affected countries, including those for asylum. Australia explained that its first priority was to protect its borders, as the disease would go out of control if it hit the Pacific. That didn't ease the deep disappointment, though. Liberia's president says stigmatizing the region won't help, as Sierra Leone's information minister flatly called the move discriminatory. On the ground, World Bank President Jim Young Kim from Ethiopia said at least 5,000 more health workers were needed urgently to fight the outbreak former UN chief Kofi Annan lamented as a poor man's disease. Amid criticism at home, U.S. President Barack Obama said healthcare volunteers should be applauded and not discouraged, warning that overzealous mandatory quarantines would be counterproductive. Meanwhile, the number of known Ebola cases in the U.S. has dwindled to 1 after a second Dallas nurse treated for the virus was pronounced fully recovered. Rescue crews are struggling to save 18 workers at a mine in southern Turkey after it was flooded with water while they were still working inside, causing the cave-in. Turkey's emergency management agency said it believed a broken pipe in the mine caused the flooding as it dispatched 200 workers to supervise rescue efforts. The missing workers are believed to be 300 meters underground, with water levels rising. The governor of Karaman province said 20 others have already been rescued. The accident comes after the country saw its worst mining disaster back in May, which killed 301 workers when a mine caught fire in Soma. And extraordinary pictures from NASA this morning after an unmanned rocket exploded seconds into liftoff. The Antares 14-story rocket launched off a Virginia commercial launch pad at 6:22 p.m. Tuesday Eastern Standard Time. Built by a private company, Orbital Sciences Corp., it was to deliver some 2,300 kilograms worth of supplies and equipment to the International Space Station, some of it classified. In a press conference that followed, NASA underlined that no person was hurt in this explosion, but that property and vehicle damage was significant. NASA spokesman Jay Bolden said Mission Control was trying to figure out what went wrong.
Good afternoon. Our chilly morning is turning into mild afternoon, and we'll see temperatures rising into the 20s, which is a bit higher than yesterday. So we are seeing big temperature gaps from day to night of over 10 degrees Celsius in some regions. So be sure to dress accordingly to avoid catching a cold. And it shouldn't be as sunny as yesterday. More clouds will be rolling into the nation as the day goes on, and the dry conditions continue. So be extra cautious if you're dealing with fire. With that, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Now, the daytime high in the capital will be topping out at 20, while Daegu climbs up to 21, and Gwangju and Busan will rise to 22 this afternoon. And on to other regions. Jeju Island and Daejeon will be getting up to 20, while Dokdo sees a high of 14 this afternoon. Well, it seems like we'll see the typical late autumn weather for the time being, and there is a nationwide showers in the forecast from this weekend. Well, that's all I have for you today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Well, thank you, GM, for the weather update. And that does it for this edition of Newsline at noon.
Have a great day wherever you are, and thanks for watching.